The problem with ideologies that are fueled by hate, fueled by fear, is that they usually have some legitimate basis, some very small nugget of truth. This small nugget of truth would be something that the arbiters of bigotry and malice will twist to justify their actions and to corrupt others. And when it comes to truth, I think so too you can say this about the Leyton conspiracy. The Starfleet coup wasn't without merit. Do I agree with his attempt to overthrow the legitimate elected civilian government of the Federation by force? No. Do I agree with what the Federation was doing to continue to be pacifistic and allow the Dominion to continue to build up in the Alpha Quadrant while they looked for peaceful resolutions? Absolutely not. Both Leyton and the Federation civilian government were right, and both of them were wrong. A Federation under a military dictatorship is no better than the Dominion, even if it is safer. But you only serve to hurt yourself and others to not use your military assets to safeguard your citizens. Sometimes looking for peace can go too far. I wish we could have seen someone more in the middle. Perhaps after Leyton failed, we would have seen Sisko go the middle ground. Not subtly, but pushing to have a more militaristic stance against the Dominion. Certainly when the war was started we see this from Sisko, but not before then, and it would have been nice to have maybe a few episodes where he laments about how Leyton had some good ideas. Perhaps it was a lost opportunity, or maybe I'm just crazy. But what did happen was that after attempting to stop Leyton, Captain Benjamin Sisko would be framed as a changeling infiltrator and locked up. The irony in this is palpable. Sisko had talked to an actual changeling infiltrator just shortly before being arrested. The changeling infiltrator had advised him that only 3 changelings were on the planet, which was more than enough. The changelings didn't need to do much to cause the destruction of the Federation. Just a nudge here, another nudge there, and ultimately the changeling was proven right. Sisko sat in a cell while a Starfleet coup was in progress. They didn't have to do much. They just had to inspire fear. The Federation was already tearing itself apart, and the changelings had barely done anything to the United Earth, relatively speaking. Not one shot had been fired, and the Dominion was close to winning a war that hadn't even began yet. And so, Benjamin Sisko sat in the brig, being watched by security around the clock. Now, here's a question. They know that certain phaser levels will force a changeling to revert back to its original form. Why didn't they try that on Benjamin? It's possible that Leyton had his people watching Sisko, but their dialogue during the incarceration makes it seem like they actually thought he was a changeling. Additionally, he could have challenged the president to do the same phaser trick. Okay, Leyton says I'm a changeling? Here's a test. Shoot me with a phaser on heavy stun. Let's see what happens. I suppose you could come up with a contrivance, but it just seems like a bit of a plot hole. In any circumstance, Sisko is visited by Leyton, who once again laments what has to be done. I like this about Leyton. He truly thinks he's doing what's best, but knows that it's wrong. He considers himself a patriot, someone who is wanting to help Starfleet against the Dominion, but ultimately is doing something that, at his core, he knows is going to change the Federation completely. And yet some hope remains that maybe they'll still make it after this. Maybe it won't be a Starfleet dictatorship. Maybe they'll defeat the Dominion and then put it back in the box, go back to being a democracy. But I also think he knows he's lying to himself on that score. Ultimately, the two square off, with neither side really seeing the other's point, and Leyton leaves, with nothing really gained for either of them but the contrasting viewpoints. Odo would ultimately free Sisko, and they would initiate a plan to stop Leyton. The two would contact Deep Space Nine, and the Defiant would be dispatched to Earth with evidence that Leyton had been manipulating the wormhole to make it seem like a cloaked fleet of Jem'Hadar's ships were on the way. They would also have additional evidence that would help show how Leyton was attempting to take over the Federation. The Defiant would, however, be intercepted by the USS Lakota under the command of Captain Erica Bentine. The crew of the Lakota had been told that the Defiant had been commandeered by changeling infiltrators and needed to be stopped before it was able to get to Earth. So after taking a look at the fighting between the Defiant and the Lakota, I don't have enough for an actual battle breakdown. Only a few clips with very little context. So I'll have to be even more general than I usually am when it comes to this. The general armaments of an Excelsior-class starship include Type 8 phaser emitters with 5 dual-bank emplacements on the forward saucer section. It would also have several emplacements for photon torpedoes. However, during the fight with the Defiant, we find that the Lakota has had several refits. We can't be sure what the updated systems were in the fight, but I sincerely believe that it had to be Type 10 phasers in order to even cause a dent in the Defiant. And of course, they also updated the system to allow photon and quantum torpedoes. It would make sense for these armaments to become the standard for future vessels during the Dominion War. Having done several battle breakdowns, the armament of the Defiant won't be any surprise. Phaser cannons, phaser emitters, photon and quantum torpedo launchers. It also had upgraded deflector shields. At this point, we know that, for the moment, the USS Defiant specifically was the only ship of its class to have ablative armor, and a cloaking device. Though there is evidence to believe ablative armor would become the standard for the Defiant-class ships in the future. When the battle first begins, I questioned why the Defiant hadn't simply cloaked. After re-watching, this was addressed, thankfully. The Defiant comes out of warp and ultimately comes within weapons range of the Lakota, not believing that the ship would fire on them. And then, well, the Lakota does fire on them, and they would have to drop shields in order to bring up their cloak, so it makes sense that they wouldn't be doing that. I do believe that in this battle, both ships would be pulling their punches. I don't really believe we see a true battle per se. Both ships would move to disable the other, and when presented with weak points, would not engage or take the advantage. From the footage we have, we do see the Defiant running circles around the Lakota, though with the firing arcs of the Lakota refit, it doesn't really matter. As I stated before, both the Lakota and the Defiant are given opportunities for a kill shot, a weakness in the Lakota's shielding, and the cache of quantum torpedoes for the Lakota, respectively. Neither side takes the advantage. Ultimately, after having communications with both Leyton and Benjamin Sisko, the Lakota would stand down and allow the Defiant to continue to Earth. The battle between the two ships would cost 26 Starfleet officers' lives. And again, this was all from a fear of the Dominion, not even the Dominion themselves. Starfleet officers would have killed Starfleet officers because they were afraid of something that hadn't even occurred yet. Unlike the buildup, the coup's ultimate failure would not be as tense as its genesis. While I am reticent to show the scene on this video, I think it's worthy of at least going to Netflix and re-watching the back and forth between Leyton and Sisko. As I stated when I began this video, both of them aren't wrong. Perhaps Sisko is more right than Leyton, but the pacifism of Earth would ultimately give a foothold to the Dominion, and the Dominion would take advantage of that. One of the unfortunate things about this interaction is that we don't really see the ripple effects. Leyton specifically states that he could try to make a fight of it, to actually plunge the Federation into civil war. Sisko counters that not many would follow him, if any, but I think this was more a tactic. I do believe some would have followed Leyton. It would just be a matter of who and how many. We see Starfleet officers so disenfranchised with the mishandling of the demilitarized zone and the Cardassians, I can't believe that we wouldn't see similar ripples with the attempted Starfleet coup. And unfortunately, we don't see the outward schism effect. You would think that there would be Starfleet officers willing to fight to change the Federation so that it could defend against what the Dominion was doing. But unfortunately, we wouldn't see anything more when it comes to this specific attempt, which is unfortunate. But Leyton wouldn't be the only one to give up his ideals. Come back on Wednesday when I do a double header for the Dominion War series and we break down In a Pale Moonlight. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. This Sunday at 9 p.m. Central Standard, we'll be playing Star Trek Online and talking about topics related to Trek. What would you like us to talk about? Let me know in the comments below or email sto@lorereloaded.com. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. And guys, I will see you on the next Lore Reloaded.